questions that you go through. And I just wonder, do you think the Australians, as much as you fight, as much as you're concerned about what's going on, do you think Australians in general, have the resolve to do something about what's going on there?
Good question. As you know, I've been blogging and researching Islam virtually every day since 9/11. Although my background with Islam goes back 10 years before that, because I lived in Southeast Asia. After 9/11, I was just absolutely sickened by the ignorance, and I will use that word rather than any other, of the average Australian, and the willingness to bury their head in the sand. Now, since 9/11, world attention has been brought onto Islam in a much more real way, and with that has come a resultant awareness and focusing of the Australian attention onto Islam. And so, yes, I do believe that we can see signs everywhere in Australia now of enough is enough, but that is a groundswell feeling and reaction that is not being represented by any of the political players in Australia. Any person in Australia who, on the political sphere, who has tried to address the encroaching Islamisation is immediately sent to Coventry by the power of the media. They label, they use those wonderful words, racist and Islamophobe, with great effect. And a lot of players in Australia are scared of those labels because it's political death.
Yeah.
So there is a massive groundswell, EB.
So there is a grassroots.
Yes, there most definitely is. And of course, it being a groundswell thing, what happens is it's marginalised and very easy to be labelled as something distasteful, and that is what happens. So most opposition has to go on in an unofficial way, and that's never a good sign in a democracy, because once people are forced to retreat from the democratic processes, they become anarchist. And
speaking of that, I don't know if our audience is aware of, several months ago, or maybe over a year ago, the riots on the beach, some Australian beach, where Muslims were beat up, and the media, of course, branded that as Islamophobia. But there was a particular reason for the white gentleman, the surfers, right, to go after them. Can you enlighten us on that, please?
Well, a little background is always useful. The Cronulla riot, as it's known, actually has a history of it. You could say throw a blanket over an entire decade of provocation and police failing to do their duty.
A decade?
Oh, at least, yes, at least. The New South Wales has had a socialist left government for a long time now. I'm not exactly sure how many years, but quite a long time. And there were quite some scandals in the New South Wales police force during the mid to late 1980s, which resulted in them sacking their police minister and advertising internationally for a new police chief. And they selected a gentleman by the name of Peter Ryan, who came from the Midlands Police in England, an area well known for dimification and for political correctness. Now, Peter Ryan brought that attitude into the New South Wales police force, and he enforced it. So we went from having police who were more than capable of tackling the Middle East crime problem, and it was a problem. The government had actually set up their own Middle East crime unit, and that was effectively disbanded under Peter Ryan. The police were forced to become politically correct and Muslim compliant, to the point where many suburbs in Sydney began to become no-go zones, and were officially or semi-officially unpoliceable. The police would not encroach into these suburbs, and they became more and more fortresses. It's a lot of people use the term ghetto, but I prefer the term fortress because they weren't ghettoised. They're extremely mobile, extremely wealthy. They just chose to live inside the fortress of these various suburbs, and the police became less and less willing and less politically powerful enough to do anything about it. So I've just been looking into the background of Cronulla the last few days, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of cases of violence reported against Lebanese people, going right back to 1982. I went back to 1982 in my search, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of cases where men of Middle Eastern appearance became the epithet. You weren't allowed to say Muslim or Lebanese, but the inaction went on for years, and there was extreme violence. There have been many incidents of sexual assault and rape, and many more incidents of male-on-male violence, where large gangs of Lebanese people turned on to minorities. And Cronulla Beach became a battleground a long time ago. I recall around about 1987, 1988, my attention was first drawn to ethnic violence at Cronulla, mainly because it's the most popular beach and the most accessible beach from these Muslim fortresses in the southwest of Sydney. And there's some historic reason for them selecting Cronulla. But what has been taking on place on the beach there is well documented. But what is also well documented was the inaction of the police to do anything. So what eventuated in December of 2006 or 2005, sorry, was what you might call a primitive response. These are not sophisticated people. These are surfers and young, disenfranchised, but very angry people. They're the people who bear the brunt of this violence and the beatings and the savagery, and they realised that there was no recourse to them from the police. So finally, the final provocation was the assault of two lifesavers on the beach. And you've got to understand...
Lifesavers?
The lifesaving... lifeguards. They are an iconic institution in Australia.
Yeah.
So the assault on them was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Were they men or women?
Men, yes.
Men, okay.
Yeah. But that is just the final straw. There are literally hundreds of incidents that took place on that beach, and not only that beach, but that one became quite the focal point. Now, there's no two ways about it. Some of the responses at Cronulla on that afternoon were appalling and alcohol fueled. But what people need to understand is the scenario that this took place is spread over some 3 kilometres. The railway station, where some of the worst violence took place, is actually over 1 kilometre from the beach where the main body of people had been gathered. And we're talking some 5,000 people spread over an enormous distance. There was no cohesion. And remember, these people they're not political animals. They're surfers, they're petrol heads, they're young, what we call young yobs.
Yobs.
Yobs, yes.
But what is astonishing after that was the cohesive effort of so many elitists and left-wingers that came out against them. And suddenly these young surfers, they've always been, outsiders and in their own unique little social world, suddenly they've been confronted with the entire intelligentsia and the left-wing thugs of New South Wales and Australian politics, and they became pariahs, and a cause of great shame, and a lot of opprobrium was dumped on them. But the left, who sort of engineered all this over 10 years of inaction, have singularly failed to note the 3 days of organised retaliation and insane brutality that took place after Cronulla, where again the police actually refused to intervene. It's well known